Everybody, this is Perch. We talk about mainstream comics, but what are mainstream comics exactly? It's kind of funny. It's more than a year ago. I did this graphic, and admittedly, it was somewhat trolling. And I said the mainstream, and I put this like, and then indie, and then niche, and kind of these different columns, these different categories. And I put Marvel and DC in indies. And it got people mad. What was weird is it got a lot of the people angry at Marvel and DC mad. I've never been able to quite work that one out. People were like, Perch doesn't know what he's talking about. That was kind of the line that a lot of people went with. Perch doesn't know what he's talking about. If you're not putting Marvel and DC in the mainstream, and the only thing I can come to is that the people who hate on Marvel and DC on a regular basis, they need Marvel and DC to be the mainstream because the entire kind of rage and anger, if you relegate them to indies, seems kind of stupid. Like, why bother complaining about this niche thing? But the reality is, if you're talking about sales, Marvel and DC are not the mainstream. They're just not. I mean, by no account are they. So anyway, let me read this mail to you. It says, "Hey Perch, simple mail today. I don't think Marvel, Image, and DC are the mainstream anymore. I mean, in terms of comics, but I'm wondering if you think they are. And what does mainstream mean to you? Is it critical acclaim, something everyone knows about, like your mother or grandmother or neighbor knows? Or can you talk about it like a TV show? Or is it sales based? Like if you sell 300 copies, you're the mainstream. Thank you for reading." So you're right. How you define mainstream really is the entire, crux of everything. So if you define mainstream by sales, by volume, by units sold, then the mainstream is Scholastic. It's Viz, it's Shonen, that's the mainstream right now. HarperCollins books does some graphic and why is because those books, when Dogman comes out, it's selling 1 million copies. When Reagan Telmeyer comes out, it's selling over 1 million copies. That is, by sales definition, the mainstream. The other way that I think is closely coupled with the mainstream would be accessibility. In this case, what I mean by accessibility is where all can you find it? And the reality is most comic books by Marvel and DC and Image are not available except in very limited locations, direct market. So, yes, they do have trade paperbacks in Barnes and Noble, and every now and then you'll hit a comic somewhere, but you can find Dogman everywhere. You can find My Hero Academia and Demon Slayer everywhere. So it's if we're talking about sales and we're talking about distribution, then the mainstream, Marvel and DC and Image, do not qualify as the mainstream. Full stop. Now, if you take the aggregated money, how much money these companies have made over time, you take historical money in play, then yeah, Marvel and DC become the mainstream again because, of course, they've got decades and decades of business. And you can't discount that. I mean, they've generated wealth for many, many, many years. So, that counts. Certainly, Marvel and DC far exceed Viz Media in terms of, historical legacy all-in money. But if we're talking about what's going on right now, that's the way I break it down. Now, the other way to look at it, and I think it's equally fair, is to say, brand recognition. So brand recognition would be, like I said, does your mother, grandmother, etc., know who these characters are? And in this instance, Marvel and DC, but really specific characters from Marvel and DC, are the mainstream. Batman and Spider-Man are well known, and particularly in the West, known far more than Deku or, Ranma or, various characters that have had good runs, over the years in manga. So, it is, so it depends on how you want to call it. In many ways, the mainstream, arguing over the mainstream becomes a little bit pointless because everybody's going to have a slightly different definition. And really, do you care if something is popular or do you just care if you enjoy it? And I mean, that's a tough question for people. There definitely is a group of people who needs what they enjoy to be popular. And that's fine. Again, that's another way you could do it. But, if you're strictly talking, what is the mainstream? I think you either got to talk about sales or you have to talk about recognition. So if you're talking about recognition, Marvel and DC are definitely in the top. Image, probably not. Spawn, as much as comic people love it, Spawn is not a mainstream recognizable character by a lot of by the masses, by the mainstream. Needs to, and Spawn's probably the one that has the best shot at it. The Walking Dead might, but again, it's zombies, so I don't. I mean, I don't know if people would necessarily know. It's like in 10 years, are people going to be able to say, oh yeah, those are the Walking Dead zombies, as opposed to the Dawn of the Dead zombies or whatever other zombies we've got. Invincible's got the show going right now on Amazon Prime, so maybe Invincible might get there. The Boys, maybe. Homelander's getting pretty powerful, pretty popular as a meme. So there's different ways you can cut it, but generally speaking, if you're talking recognition, Marvel and DC are certainly making the cut, and I think that's here's where I'll turn against my own argument. To me, the mainstream is ultimately judged more by recognition than by profit, in my book. Profit matters, and usually they go hand in hand. But I think if we're talking about what makes something the mainstream, the way I interpret that, and again, this is only my definition, is the mainstream equals the mainstream audience. The mainstream audience heavily plays to recognition. And so I think the mainstream doesn't necessarily care about profitability. They, arguably, they're, what characters are popular, what is well known. I think that's just the way I would kind of split it down the middle. So, it is what it is. I think that the real question that goes into things is, were Marvel and DC once the mainstream, and now they're not? And I think the answer to that is definitely, I mean, by profitability, absolutely, and by units sold and everything else. And I think that this is a case where recognition trails profit. So the problem, if I'm a shareholder in Disney or in Marvel and I'm thinking long term about my portfolio, I am a little nervous that the comic properties, if not supported by movies and media, are going to suffer. I think that's a big problem. So I definitely am concerned. This is one of those weird things, and I've had this argument with people too. They say, well, if the movies are making money and if all that's working well, who cares whether the comics are selling or not? And I get that argument. Raw profits are raw profits, but at the same time, it shouldn't be this hard to sell comics. And I think that is the alarm bell. That's the red flag people should watch out for. It shouldn't be so difficult to move comics. If it is, and simultaneously we have $1 billion movie on our hands, that should worry. That should worry us a little bit. That should be concerning. For whatever reason, and there's lots of speculation, certainly lots of videos, lots of analysis, including me, but lots of people have put their guesses out there. But I think that it is the canary in the coal mine that these comics with characters that are recognized the world over aren't selling. And I think that is or at least not selling as well as they should. And so you can correlate or not correlate the movies to the comics all you want, but at the end of the day, having that big a gap is concerning. And I think ultimately that helps feed the fall out of the mainstream. So that's how I would define it. Again, it really depends on you, how you view things. Do you view the mainstream as legit or not legit? Do you view it by money? Do you view it by popularity? I think, or maybe do you have a third angle? So let me know in the comments below. What are your angles here? Is it money? Is it popularity, recognition? Is there some other thing? Or are you just, the mainstream in your heart is what you like, the end. That's fair too. In fact, arguably, that's the most fair of them all. So let me know your thoughts in the comments below, how you judge these comics. Very, very interested to hear it. Like and subscribe, of course, and thanks for listening.